2.5 years ago, Todd Cavallo and his wife Crystal left Brooklyn for the Hudson Valley in order to pursue their dream of producing wine. Todd joined us recently to talk about hybrid grapes, sulfites, and the scientific rationale behind burying a cow horn filled with the manure of a lactating heifer under a full moon. Here's that conversation. Welcome to the show, Todd.
Thank you for having me.
So, natural wine is having a bit of a moment, but I feel like nobody knows what the terms really mean.
Yeah.
Can you tell me the difference between like low intervention wine, biodynamic, natural, organic? What should we be looking for?
Starting
on our
with
labels?
the tough questions. Okay. So on the labels is hard. There's not a lot of stuff that's actually going on the labels, and if it is, I don't know if you always want to believe it. Natural wine is kind of an all-encompassing thing that has parts of all the others in it. So usually it involves at least organic viticulture, if not biodynamic. So you're trying to be as natural as you can in the vineyard. And then in the winery, it's basically low intervention. It's going to be low sulfur, and then no other additives, usually unfined, unfiltered. So what a lot of people say is nothing added, nothing removed. That's kind of our belief as well. And it's a lot of people have a lot of opinions about it. My opinion is just that it's the best way to express the grapes in the region that you're coming from, terroir, if you want to call it that. And so that's why we vinify in the way that we do. But the other kind of interesting factor is organic wine, at least in the United States, can be labeled organic or grown with organic grapes. And in the winery, you can have a number of additives, not the same, 200 or something that you can add to any non-organic wines, but you don't necessarily know what's happening in the winery if something's labeled made with organic grapes, for example.
Interesting. So you're sort of looking at two different parts of the winemaking process. One is everything that's happening with the actual growing of the grapes, and the other one is what's happening once they are being turned into wine.
Right, exactly.
And tell me a little bit about what you do at Wild Ark.
So we are fairly young. So we have a little vineyard on our property, about 1.5 acres. Most of it is going to be on its second leaf this year, which just means second year of growing, and some of it's on the third leaf. So we're not really going to be in production there for another 2 to 3 years to be able to use those grapes for wine. And so we're growing fully biodynamically, although, again, that usually implies a kind of a closed system. You think of the farm as an organism where there are no inputs. You usually will have animals and be using their manure for your fertilizer. You keep a compost pile, and all of your scraps go into that, so you're breaking that down to use for more of your soil. We don't have animals yet because we don't have the infrastructure or the resources to do that, so we're buying in a lot of our biodynamic preps from other farms, but we're also staying fully organic, so we're not spraying any of the non-organic fungicides that kind of are usually considered necessary in a region that's cooler and wetter. And then while we're figuring out what's going on with our farm, we're buying in fruit from other local growers and kind of helping them move towards more organic or biodynamic practices.
So you just made biodynamic wine sound very normal, where it's just like, oh, yeah, we've got some manure, we're going to spread around. But actually there's some like odder parts of some biodynamic wine growing practice. Can you tell me about that?
Right. So, Rudolf Steiner, who is the founder of biodynamics, had a lot of ideas about the universe and cosmic balance.
Right.
And so
people may know him from Steiner schools,
right,
and also from like satanic sex parties.
Maybe. I don't know about the sex parties. I was never invited.
He's a famous spiritualist and occultist.
Yes. But he was also a contemporary of Waldorf. So the Waldorf schools and the Steiner schools share a lot of the same kind of focus on nature and natural learning. And a lot of the stuff that kind of carries into modern day biodynamics is the more kind of observable, repeatable stuff. Like the thing that people always like to point to is the burying of a cow horn filled with cow manure. You do it at the spring equinox, and you dig it up at the fall.
People love that one.
Yeah,
it does capture the imagination, right? I always picture the vintner like wearing some type of hooded cloak as he's burying the horn full of shit.
Some people chanting in the background.
Vines. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yes. So the shit-filled horn. I didn't know if we could curse. I'm glad you gave me the go-ahead. But his idea is that the horn acts as a cosmic antenna and brings in the cosmic energy of the universe into the manure that you then spread on your fields the next season. Sure, that's a little wacky and out there. But also, it just so happens that the material that the horn is made of is exactly the right porosity that you need to increase the bioactivity in the manure over that 6-month period being buried. And so there have been studies done where they look at manure treated that way, manure composted naturally or normally, and the stuff that was buried in the horn happens to be more bioactive. So there is some kind of scientific side of each of those things.
Sure, there's a scientific rationale to the more witchy-woo side of it.
Right, exactly.
So do you do that part of it?
So we don't have our own animals yet, right? So the 500 prep, which is the cow horn manure we're buying in from a farm down in Virginia, the Josephine Porter Institute, they're kind of a big proponent across the East Coast, and so a lot of people who are getting started will get their preparations from them. And then,
I love that it's called something as unsexy as 500 prep as well.
500, 501 to 507. Yeah,
Okay.
they're all numbered. And they're all kind of interesting and different. There's different flowers, yarrow, chamomile, buried or hung in trees and things like stag's bladders and animal skulls. It's a little wacky, but like I said, you can rationalize it on the scientific side if you think about it.
Sure, some of my favorite people are a little wacky.
Yeah, exactly.
So why was it a priority for you to use biodynamic farming practices in growing your grapes? Can you taste the difference, do you think?
If you were to blind me on a bunch of biodynamic versus non-wines that were otherwise vinified similarly, I doubt that I or many people in the world could tell the difference. But many of the great wines of the world are grown that way and have been doing it for a long time and have been making wine for hundreds of years, especially in places like Burgundy. And if they are saying that they have done enough experimentation and tasting and can tell the difference, that's someone who I'm willing to kind of listen to. They have the expertise and they have done the work. For me, it's more along the lines of I want to do what's right for the land and the earth and the place. I mean, we live on our property with our daughter, which is what all the small French producers say too. I don't want my kids running out in the fields after I'm spraying these toxic fungicides and herbicides. So we want to do right by the land, and when it comes down to it, wine is a luxury product, and I don't think it's right to be growing a luxury product in any non-sustainable ways. So we're focusing on that and also focusing on the soil as part of the growing organism, and hopefully by creating a soil that's rich and biodiverse and we can grow our wine grapes and our food that we grow on our property, and eventually chickens and sheep or whatever other animals we decide to use, hopefully they'll kind of contribute to that health and our health.
And so you haven't, your vines aren't mature enough to make your own wine from your own vines, but you are making wine from neighboring farms.
Yes.
And so now when we talk about the actual making of the wine, are you low intervention on that side of things, or what are sort of your guiding principles?
Yes, yeah, we're low intervention. We do use a little bit of sulfur in about half of our cuvées. This year, about half of them have no sulfur in them. Although, as we progress and see what happens to them, we may decide to give them a little dose before bottling.
And I think that there's a lot of talk about added sulfites. Tell me why a winemaker adds sulfites and what some of the challenges to not doing that are.
So sulfites are a preservative, and they act in kind of a couple different ways. One is that they're an antioxidant. So as you're making wine and moving it around and it's exposed to oxygen, it can start to oxidize. And that's something that you can taste in the wine. It'll turn a white wine a darker color. And just kind of over the course of before it gets put into the bottle, you want to make sure to limit that as much as possible. So that's one way to do that. But it's also an antibacterial, so it'll kill any of the bacteria that are present on the fruit as it comes in, which can fight with the yeast that are doing the fermentation that you want to make the alcohol and eventually bubbles if you're making a sparkling. And so you're dosing it with a little bit of sulfur or sometimes a lot to kill all that bad stuff to make sure that nothing is getting in there that shouldn't be. And it's kind of, it's like the gluten of the wine world. It's a very easy target for something that some people have a negative reaction to. And so it's something that people can focus on.
Right.
Like, that's the part of the wine that makes me feel bad. Not the fact that there's a lot of alcohol in it, which is a poison also. And I drank 3 bottles last night. So it's...
Because this is the claim that natural wine doesn't give you the same type of hangover that natural wine, or the wine with a bunch of added sulfites does.
Right. It's like, if you could put arsenic in a barrel of wine to to kill everything that's in it and then somehow remove the arsenic, you still kind of would want to know that there was arsenic used in the process.
Still not giving that to my child.
Right, sure.
So tell me a little bit about the bottles that you have brought today.
So these are two of our wines. One of them, the Chardonnay, was from the fall release, and this one that's unlabeled is going to be coming out in the spring. And they're with two of the growers that we've been working with, one who is about 10 minutes up the road from us. We got them to move off of herbicides right away, which is like the number one thing I think you can do for wine quality. You don't want to be spraying the glyphosate along the base of the vines every season. And they're moving more towards organic antifungal sprays. And then this one is a hybrid grape called Marquette from way up outside of Troy, New York.
So there's like a growing winemaking culture in New York State, Finger Lakes, North Fork. What are some of the challenges about growing in New York State?
The climate is definitely challenging for vinifera, for the grapes that we know from Europe, mostly because of the humidity in the summers. You know, we have the heat, we have the sunshine, we can ripen grapes, but it's very humid, and that means there's a lot of disease pressure from the different mildews and rot that can take the grapes and just turn them into mush on the vine. But downy and powdery mildew are the big ones. It just means you have to be a lot more careful about maintaining airflow so that things can dry out faster. So there's a lot of leaf pulling that gets done. We have our fruiting zone, it's called, where the grapes actually grow, trained a lot higher than you traditionally would. It's about a meter above the ground instead of 20 inches or so, because the further from the ground you are, the less splashback you get from the ground when you get last year's kind of mildew and spores and things back up onto the grapes. But yeah, beyond that, it's also the winters. It's hard because there are hard freezes that can kill off a vine, and then the grafted vines, because all vines, even the vinifera all over Europe, 99% of it is grafted onto American rootstock. Those graft points are very fragile as well, and so we have to cover those up with dirt, a few inches of dirt every season to give them about 10 degrees or so of protection, which helps keep them safe. But then, now you've got major temperature swings because of climate change.
I'm feeling like I'm identifying very strongly with grapes. I also don't like winters here. I feel like I'm more of like a Paso Robles type varietal.
Yeah, it's funny. My brother just got married out there this summer, and I was like, ooh, maybe
nice.
I chose the wrong area to be growing grapes and come back out here and visit more often.
So tell me about this lovely Chardonnay, very, very appley.
Yeah.
How is it aged?
So this is in neutral oak for 10 months. There's not that kind of vanilla, toasty, spicy notes. It gives it the texture that a barrel gives it because of the oxygen transfer.
Yeah, it's not like a huge buttery California Chardonnay.
Exactly.
It's
but
nice.
It's not as lean and straightforward as a fully stainless because it's got a little bit of that air that gives it some texture.
Very nice. Yeah. Can I try this hooch that you brought?
Yeah, let's see if it's gonna.
Oh,
there we go. Still a little sparkling. So again, this is a hybrid.
It's a lovely color.
Yeah.
Nice
So
red.
we tried to make it as light a rosé as we could, but this grape is a grape that has red flesh, which is pretty unheard of in the vinifera world, except for a few like Alicante Boucher. But Marquette and a lot of the other hybrids have the red flesh, and so you can't really make a light wine or a white wine out of them like you would with Pinot Noir when you make a Blanc de Noir. They compare this a lot to Pinot Noir, but I don't like to make direct comparisons to vinifera grapes. Sets the bar a little too high.
Got it. Got a lot of like strawberry on the nose, personally.
So that's we did 2 days of what's called carbonic maceration, where you seal it in a tank with CO2. And what that does is it allows the enzymatic activity inside the fruit to start the alcoholic fermentation, and it makes a whole bunch of different compounds that you don't get with a normal yeast fermentation. Yeah, so we're excited about this. And this is one of our zero sulfur cuvées this year. So this is just grapes and thyme, no additives, no sulfur, unfined, unfiltered. Checks all the boxes. That's what we're going to call it, actually.
It's great. I feel like this is a wine that I would be really happy with, and my 21-year-old niece would be really happy with as well.
And it's a good pizza wine, too.
Oh, great. Always looking for that. It seems like maybe a steep learning curve. How do you learn all this?
There are a lot of people in the Northeast who have been doing this who are super helpful. Our friend Andrew at Eminence Road, we crushed our first grapes up there with him. He's up in the Catskills, but he gets his fruit from the Finger Lakes. But there are a lot of resources that are available in books and in podcasts that weren't available, a few dozen years ago.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show and for bringing wine for me to drink. More
Absolutely.
guests doing that, please. Thanks, Todd. Appreciate
Sure.
your time.
Thank you for having me.